Hello everyone, this is Mike speaking. Now just a quick video to reply from Naruto. I do apologize in advance if I have butchered your name. You have highlighted that I have to debunk a video on Hakim on Hong Kong protests. Yes, you're right. This is the Boxing Day gift that I'm going to deliver to all of you guys today. Now, let's take a look at the video. What it is about.
Oh boy, get ready for a spicy video. This will probably be a controversial one. Before I start, no, I am not some blind defender of China. In fact, I'm just the opposite, and I have many grievances that could be discussed at a later point. This video is just meant to provide more nuance to the conversation. With that said, let's start. Logically, as rational people, we should carry out an investigation of all the facts before we arrive at our conclusions, let alone carry out any action.
Now, that's very true. Of course, we have to carry out facts investigation. The trouble is, I'm afraid this person who produced this video is not really conduct so many investigation on this area, which we're going to have a dive in very soon.
This applies a lot to everyday life, and even more so to politics. When it comes to political actions, a staple is protesting. A protest can either be channeled into a specific goal or used to make general discontent heard. Now, it shouldn't be controversial to say
yes, of course, protesting is very good important too. However, we have to bear in mind also that protesting in Hong Kong is a very rare thing. I mean, it was considered as a very drastic movement back then, and that is very huge context we have to put in and bear in mind
that not every protest deserves support. A prime example of this is the Hong Kong protests. Now, if you have some affinity for that movement, just wait and listen to what I have to say. First things first, generally, internet support really doesn't amount to much. Changing a profile picture or retweeting a hashtag or a nauseating amount of Reddit posts can neither benefit nor hurt the course or outcome of any protests, for the most part.
Now, I'm not a huge fan of changing the Facebook profile pictures whatsoever, because I think it's just a virtual signaling act, really. So I was never a fan of it. But let's continue.
Usually, Western governments have made up their mind long before everyday people start expressing their own opinions, because in some cases, such as Hong Kong, they had a direct hand in what's going on.
Now, I know in the later of the video, this guy was going to imply that this is like money spending or whatever that it is interest over there. Now, I have to intervene here. There is a direct interest for the British government to do so. A very good reminder that there are 6 types of British nationalities under the British nationality laws, and the British national overseas is a type of nationalities that is around 3 million people here. Okay, now you can reference to this BBC articles. We talk about an estimate 2.9 million. Yes, around 3 million. Okay, so that is a very clear interest. I want to once again remind everyone that the BNO stands for British. The B stands for British. Okay, we have the obligation of British. Our passport covers right as the United Kingdom of the Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and you can see about that. It was simply irresponsible to say that we're not British, and it will be also irresponsible to say that the British government does not have any relationship or connection towards Hong Kong. That's why they still publish the half-year report every year after the handover. Let's continue.
You supporting them by word or not really doesn't matter.
Now, word or not, this is a very interesting point, because I myself has been following one of our predecessors in order to campaign for the BNO for equal rights, and we are almost there because we get the BNO visa scheme. And this is vital because this is basically it's an act of discrimination, because we have the obligation of British, but we rights as we are not settled in the UK. So words does matter and action does matter too. And we always say that this is the formula of portray. I probably have not been talking about that yet, because we have a lot of things that we would love to deliver on. Scotty and I, we would love to deliver more, but you know we have a time constraint over here. So that is the thing that we cannot say too many.
But more to the point, let's talk about what has happened. Lots of people in the West seem to think that this is about freedom, democracy, police brutality, etc., all things that need to be defined, but we'll leave that for later. The entire thing started because of a bill known as the Fugitive Offenders and Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Legislation Bill. I know it's a mouthful. This bill became a thing because in 2018, a pregnant woman was murdered by her boyfriend in Taiwan, who then fled to Hong Kong. Since there was no extradition bill between Hong Kong and Taiwan, he couldn't be extradited. Despite the
Now, extradition bill. Now, first of all, we have to understand the concept of here. Now, extradition, that is the key, is that whether Taiwan want to be extradited or not. I'm sorry, but the Taiwan refused to extradition cooperation with Hong Kong over human rights issue. I mean, what happened was that because most of the people does not realize that the implication of this bill. On paper, it was apparently a good bill, but the problem is that it will open a precedent that will allow the those who were deemed to be commit crimes over in the PRC, then they can, even though they live in Hong Kong, they can transfer up to there. So this will over a huge uh, paradox of, I mean, a huge box. You understand where I come from? That will create the problem, and that is the triggering point. Seems that he clearly, I do not know whether haven't researched enough or run a spin or just dodging it, but let's carry on.
The fact that Hong Kong is part of China, under the one country two system setup, Hong Kong still maintains its own extradition treaties with other nations. The argument from the other side was that this amendment to existing extradition law will impede upon Hong Kong's legal system and rid them of their autonomy, which is hilariously stupid.
Now, this is not hilariously stupid. I've already highlighted previously because this will open the channel that allow PRC to claim those people who basically labeled to be legally guilty. Then going to ask, okay, Hong Kong, now we're using this bill to open the loophole to go and say that, look, you're going to get him out. Now, I have some rather diplomatic sources actually told me that the original idea to run this bill was to weigh that some of the officials that is over it, that's middle, not the top officials, the middle to upper top officials, because back then President Xi was about to be his birthday, so trying to give it as a birthday gift, but obviously it over an absolute disaster afterwards. But let's go on.
The law only affects the system in one way. Right now, in order to carry out extradition, there has to be a treaty. Under this bill, however, the chief executive would be given the power to begin the process of extradition on a case-by-case basis in the case of countries seeking extradition where there is no formal treaty.
Now, I've already highlighted this point previously. Now, if you really insist to argue, shouldn't it should be up to the court to decide? And by the way, why is only the chief executive to decide? I mean, where's the check and balance? You see, that is the point how these people trying to carefully spin the whole thing away and just simply ignore the ground facts. Now, before I continue, if you like this video, please show it to us and give us a like now. And make sure you subscribe and ring the bell. I know this is a classic YouTube cliches, but do appreciate to do so because I'm sure you know this is how YouTube functions and you want to get more views. That is how it is. Let's carry on.
It's a simple law meant to ease judicial matters, and with the appropriate context in mind, it honestly is a legitimate thing to bring about.
Wrong. If you keep on talking about the Taiwan case or whatsoever, Taiwan, we have a precedent before how to arrange things because they could always use a mediator to do so. The problem is that this guy clearly ignored what I've just said. Anyway, let's keep on moving on.
This is about bringing a murderer to justice for the death of a young woman and her unborn child, not quote-unquote freedom.
They could have discussed and negotiated this behind the scene, which has been Taiwan and Hong Kong has done a lot of times, and how things could be facilitated. I mean, for example, from hijacking of aircraft to facilitate all these kind of things go back, having done by a lot of unofficial channels, there's no need to use these kind of strict formal channels because we know that how delegated and balancing all these activities, especially as we know, technically speaking, ROC and PRC is just, well, I mean, even not ceasefire. They are just stop fighting. I mean, there's not even a ceasefire agreement. So this is a very delicate situation. Apparently, this guy does not really understand the Far East. That's also one of the reasons why I go to Scotty's channel because, let's face it, not how many people understand the Far East. Anyway, let's keep on listening.
The people making this out to be about democracy are either CIA shills, ignorant, or, to use the scientific term, full of shit.
Well, I mean, it is quite shy now for him because what happens is this will open the box that, well, those people who deem to be PRCs consider anyone that is not, well, in their perspective, that is having guilty for anything. I mean, you know the PRC how representing the cause, how representing stuff it is. So that is the issue.
During the colonial era of Hong Kong, when the British controlled practically everything, there were no elections from 1843 until 1985.
Factually inaccurate. That is huge. Now, just to give you an idea, now, I know this is a Wikipedia. Now, I will show quite a lot of Wikipedia stuff up here, but it's just for illustration purposes only. Now, if you are interested in it, you're more than welcome to conduct your research yourself. This is 1950 to Hong Kong elections, because we have a district, we have the urban council, or basically multiple council, okay? Whatever you want to call it, because you're the urban council. There were elections. The turnout was bloody low, because what happened was that if you conduct further investigation, because there are only two polling stations, one in Hong Kong, one in Kowloon, and that was a bloody rainy day. Or just a very bad weather, because I have a friend who happened, conveniently enough, to be having his PhD thesis, but because he's a history historian, his PhD thesis is about post-colonialism in Hong Kong post World War II. So he has read a lot of documents on that. I'm afraid he is finding the wrong person to trying to argue with. Of course, he's not arguing with me, but you know what I'm saying. Let's take a look what he's going to say next.
Yes, 1985. Britain simply appointed governors at will.
Oh, forgot to say that. Yes, of course, governor as will. And bear in mind that we have 1952 elections. I forgot to mention about the Young Plan. The Young Plan basically is about the governor Mark Young, the governor just before Hong Kong was surrendered to Japanese upon a few months just before. He actually, after the civilian government, British government restored the order, when he come back, he proposed to have a representative democracy in Hong Kong. Now, I know, and once again, now, the Wikipedia stuff is for illustration purposes only. You're more than happy to conduct your research yourself, because I'm trying to show what it's about. However, because when the 90 later, first of all, Governor Young has retired. Next, what happened was that when the PRC established, the PRC, the mainland China, became extremely unstable. So what happened was that instead of running election immediately, they hang on. Now you may say, look, how about when the PRC started stable in the 1950s and 60s? Now, funny thing is that I want to show you something. This is a declassified document from in the 1950s from the British government. Now, this is the extract. I take it out, and I will going to read it out in case you have difficulties to read that. Extract from a note by Lieutenant Colonel Gantao, I hope I butcher his name, on his interview with Zhou Enlai. Zhou Enlai is the Prime Minister of the PRC, okay? So he's the number 2 of the government, okay? So he's the Mao's lieutenant. And on 13th January 1958. With regard to Hong Kong, there was an important point he, Zhou Enlai, wished to put forward personally to Mr. Macmillan, that is the Prime Minister, Halford Macmillan, the British Prime Minister, or at least to his deputy. A plot or conspiracy was being hatched to make Hong Kong a self-governing domino like Singapore, basically self-governing. You know, the properly is referred to Mark Young's plan originally. This had the approval of several members of the British and Hong Kong governments. He wished Mr. Macmillan to know that China would regard any move towards domino status, that's basically democratic situation in Hong Kong, as a very unfriendly act. China wished to present colonial status of Hong Kong to continue with no change whatever. Now you see, this is an active suppression by the PRC trying to use the way to intimidate the British government and the British Hong Kong government to try to stop it. Now that is a very important act. Apparently, I suppose this guy doesn't know this exists. Now you may ask, look, then do we have other terms later? Yes, it does. My friend who studied the post-colonialism in Hong Kong about how the election and functions, he told me that he actually, during his research in the British archive, he read a piece by there was a red letter to the then in the 1970s by the then British Foreign Secretary, later the Prime Minister, James Callaghan, who was the then governor of Hong Kong, Murray McLehorse, to basically urging him to progress the urban council that we just said, like from running like local councils in a British sense, to improve to a more legislative function, to ultimately a domino, like a democratic sense. Actually, Marcos refused that proposal, and well, back and forth. My friend told me that actually, as a ground, that it is not sure that whether the Chinese people are really ready to do so. But in fact, the foreign secretary will argue that you have to let them try some small things first. In order to like growing. So the funny thing is that the British government would never uh, against democracy. In fact, it's merely MacLehor's very cautious approach. The funny thing is that he himself was supposed to be a progressive socialist at heart. Of course, as a civil servant, he hid himself about that, but we knew that is the thing because especially he was basically bailed out by the Labour Prime Minister, um, uh, Howard Wilson, when he dodged the files because they go to the same club, gentleman's club, because they share very same beliefs, similar beliefs. So we know that he is a left wing, but he kept his views very, very private. So I have a great admiration because of that. Because you can only, but I'm not interested by his politics. I have to say very clear about it. Although he does some great work for Hong Kong. Okay, so to make myself clear about that, and that is the thing. And so I'm not 100% sure this guy's really know what he's talking about. But let's carry on.
Very democratic. Afterwards, only when the handover process to China begun did very limited elections take place. Only in 1995 did they have a legislative council.
Well, the problem is that it could have been faster, but the thing is that the PRC government gives so much pressure that in the early 90s they have to botch some of these universal suffrages. Not until Chris Patten, the last governor, the former Conservative Party chair, actually come in and to say that we're not going to, we're just ignore the PRC. Excuse me, bad stomach, and we're going to just push for it. And that is the thing. Excuse me. And seems someone don't know the facts straight away. So that is a huge problem. That you have people who just pretend to know everything, but in fact, all they're talking about is really shite. Anyway, let's carry on.
That was entirely democratically elected. After being rightfully returned to China, Hong Kong became even more democratic as
rightfully returned to China. This is the biggest joke I have ever heard today. Now, let's take a look. That was the poll conducted in 1982 about the population, whether to see whether they supported the British government or for the future that it is, because they were because the John Declaration was signed in 1984. Now, this is the preferred outcomes. To maintain status quo, that is the British colonial redirect rule, by the way, 70%. To become trust territory, 85%. To be taken back by China and under Chinese administration, that is the PRC with 4%. None of the above 2%. Don't know 9%. In other words, the handover was against 96 people, 96% of the people. Can you believe that? 96 people, 96%, excuse me, 96% of the population against something that's been done. And he called it a rightful return. That is a very, very questionable judgment. And that's why I always said that. Bear in mind that there was no, despite with 70% of population for British rule, no referendum was granted, and we the British Chinese were excluded from the boardroom to discuss our own fate. The handover of the Hong Kong, as I always said, would it be the most disgusting and disgraceful chapter of the decolonization of the British Empire, and the way that Margaret Thatcher, while I have a great admiration of her in handling the economy and turning the whole economy around, and at the same time, defended Falklands well, but the way that she handled Hong Kong will be remembered as the next naval chamberlain, I'm afraid. Well, so I correct myself. She won't be remembered as next naval chamberlain. She's worse than naval chamberlain because naval chamberlains sell foreigners down the river. She sell a foreign. She sell a British, not the foreigners, down to the Victoria Harbour. That is outrageous, in my perspective, for a man who all understands all these things to claim this is a rightful return. Now, let's listen to what he's going to say next.
As the People's Republic of China added more seats both directly elected and in the so-called functional constituencies that represent subsets of the population in a type of electoral college.
Now, they try to run a spin off the functional constituency to say this is an electoral college. When you talk about electoral college, you will always think about the American electoral college, don't you? The problem is that is not the case. Now, here is the idea of what you have seen. Now, this is 1998 to 2000. Legislative Council total members list. You see industrial, So this is you can basically, if you're only in the industrial if you sector, if you can only vote, okay, you're a company director. Commercial, you only be a certain business of chamber you can vote. Election committee basically serves as a small electoral college that is a very that's a highly closely controlled area in order to elected people for the chief executive. And then you have the agriculture, you have the health service, and then of course you have new territory rest and all these other things. They are basically those who are as across is universal suffrage, okay, by directly elected. Those in star are in the functional constituency. I mean, this is the whole thing. Now you can check the list yourself. You can go to legislative council, check yourself. Now, a very good reminder that actually, according to the Article 68 of the Hong Kong Basic Law, ultimately the Hong Kong Legislative Council, it should be going through the universal suffrage. Okay, so to make myself very clear about that. Let me find the highlight first. Yes, by universal suffrage. And actually, so the chief executive will be. And it was supposed to be in the universal because conducted in the 2012. Let me find this clause for you. Yes, in the year 2002. Now, this is the instrument that basically further explain the whole thing. In other words, move the goalposts. So to illustrate, so this is for the illustration purposes only. Okay, here. And now we're going to move on to see what he's going to talk about next.
Secondly, I think it's interesting just how much traction the Hong Kong protests got, despite the fact that there are way bigger protests going on around the world, with actual real instances of horrific state repression and murder of protesters. The protests in Iraq have over 100 dead in just a few weeks. The protests in Chile in just 2 weeks have 20 dead. The protests in Hong Kong, which have been going on since June, 0 dead. Not a soul. In fact,
now that's the point I previously talked about. Bear in mind that, Hong Kong was never supposed to be a protesting city, and we have seen these things happen. This is the illustration that people are not happy, and you have never seen such a radical thing. So we have to have a sense of proportion. We're comparing a place that easily got protest and compared to a place that was hardly protesting. That's the key.
In fact, the amount of restraint the police in Hong Kong have shown is amazing, especially compared to my own country, Iraq, where I can't even leave work without being harassed by cops, or in Chile, where they're cracking skulls by the hour.
Remain constrained that basically have to use tear gas. I mean, excuse me. I'm not very sure he knows what he's doing. Okay, let's continue.
Now, before the argument is brought up, no, I am not defending police. In fact, I think the institution should be abolished. But remember that the image being shown to both you and I is one of extreme state repression in Hong Kong, where there really isn't any. Regardless, back on point. Why are the Hong Kong protesters getting so much traction, especially on English-speaking mediums, and Western government support, compared to the protests in Iraq, or Lebanon, or Chile, etc.? You and I both know that if the United States is supporting something, then there's probably something rotten.
Now, I would not 100% to say that the US supporting that is something rotten. Now, in fact, those of you who already watched my video streams that previously discussed with Scotty, then you will know that I've argued that Hong Kong is being the battleground of different factions of the CCP, that's and the anti-Xi and the pro-Xi, that Xi himself, that is, and the battleground to trying to crash as a crushing point, because the anti-Xi trying to use Hong Kong as a way to, as a political leverage, basically create a chaos to blame Xi, to saying that, look, you create a huge bloody mess, so you better go away, as a way to gain political leverage. Now, in fact, I suspect that some of the anti-Xi factions are actually connected with the Americans quite well. That's why originally, if you recall last month, Scotty pulled it out on the community. We talked about the Biden on China. We're trying to talk about something about that, but unfortunately we're running out of time. I'm running out of my batteries. You might recall that I awkwardly have to cut the stream at the middle, which I do apologize again here. But that is a lot of things. We will talk about that later in the next stream. I know this is a bait, but you're gonna love this, and make sure you come and join us when there's a next stream available. And if you want to know when the next stream available, you know what I'm gonna say. Like this video, subscribe, and make sure you ring the bell. You know the YouTube glitches, and I'm sure you're going to do it. Let's take a look what you're going to say next.
If they've ever really cared for democracy, they would have never overthrown Salvador Allende, the democratically elected leader of Chile, and put a fascist dictator in his place.
Now I would let this back to Scotty to explain the situation because he's explained it in multiple times now. I'm sure that he will be very very happy to explain that. And he has a very well presented case, and I would let him to deliver this part for you.
Anyhow, let's take a deeper look. The main organizers are the Civil Human Rights Frontier, a coalition made up of some 48 pro-democracy, and I use that term very loosely, NGOs and political groups. Unsurprisingly, many of them are American-backed groups used to further American interests.
Now, I just have to interrupt here. We have seen enough evidence to show that actually these people are in fact controlled oppositions. Now, we're going to have a deep dive in the next stream because we're going to spend the next half an hour to talk about what is going on. So this is just to have a brief idea what is going on, okay? Just to have an idea what it is. But let's carry on.
In the region. Again, if there's American money around, then there's something foul. This shouldn't be a controversial statement. If you're okay with American money directly funding these groups for some weird reason, then imagine protests in the US being directly backed by Russian and Chinese money. Then imagine them waving Chinese flags around. Then imagine these protest organizers and leaders meeting Chinese political officials. Then imagine them asking Xi Jinping to militarily intervene in the United States.
Now, once again, it seems that someone forget that. One, this is a British. There are around 3 million British nationals, and they're dissidents, we haven't counted dissidents yet, over in Hong Kong. And we know the special relationship between American and the British. So by definition, you expected that to have waving British flags and British colonial flags and American flags. So seems someone has conveniently once again dodged the question that we start from the beginning that I illustrate. Anyway, let's take a look what he's going to say next.
All of a sudden, the need for nuance begins to make a lot more sense, doesn't it? Also, an interesting side note, putting aside the horribly inflated numbers for protest attendees, some people are being paid to show up to the protests. Another thing conveniently left out of the official...
Now, I paused at the wrong time. Now, the thing is very simple. Some people have been paid to get into the protest. I do have heard these noises, and I cannot 100% verify it, but I do heard that I have sources who heard that they have been approached. So let's say it this way. But someone conveniently forgot that the supporting the CCP side also have done the same thing. Now, I'm not saying that this is a good thing, but it seems that the lack of balance here is shocking. Let's continue.
Official narrative is how many in Hong Kong actually support the extradition bill. 60% of the population doesn't support independence for Hong Kong at all. Many people are very unhappy with the protest.
Now, once again, they flip the concept here. Does not support the independence of Hong Kong doesn't mean that they are saying that they're not against the bill, and then they're saying that this status quo is acceptable. You see the point there? Flipping the ideas around, changing the concepts around, and present the same. Very, very cunning approach. Let's take a look what he's going to say next.
The population doesn't support independence for Hong Kong at all. Many people are very unhappy with the protests, the large-scale rioting and destruction of public property going on that honestly serves no purpose other than to look pretty for Western cameras.
Now, there are of course some people who are not happy with the destruction, which is true by the way, I'm not hiding that. But the question is, if you are going to say that the majority of people are happy with the bill, I'm sorry, you are dead set wrong. People can dispute the approach and methods in express their anger and concerns, but if you're going to say that there is no anger, or if it's not a lack of anger and concerns, that is what he's trying to present, which is again wrong.
They're not waving around American flags, writing signs in English, and singing the US anthem for fun. They're doing it because they know it'll get attention from English-speaking Westerners and Western media. As for those waving...
Now, once again, we back to the point about the British responsibilities. See this type of people, they're trying to, in my way, they're too eager to help the British government to dodge the responsibilities. I always pointed out the point. This is a British honor. And this, remember, if Hong Kong were to have conducted a referendum, it would have been a landslide victory of the British government. Remember the 70% of the population that expressed that they have support of the status quo and there was a British direct colonial rule. You see these people? Always ignore facts. Now, let's take a look. What is the next factually incorrect thing he's going to say?
Around British colonial flags, They're just conveniently ignoring their own history in vain hope that they'll get some more support from the West. They forget how, during the colonial period, laws were passed to ensure that no Chinese would live in the most desirable areas of Hong Kong.
Now, first of all, it is true that the law has been passed. No, this tab. No, this tab. Yes, this tab. The very famous, this tab act. You're right. I mean, say you. I mean, that guy was right. It's very simple. It's because of the plague, the Black Death. That's outbreak over in Hong Kong. Yes, there are some sociologists will argue that it has been extended to it is kind of like a segregation approach. But I'm sorry. Now, I cannot find back the link at the moment, but I've read some very horrible hygienic practices. I mean, as an ethnic Chinese, as a British Hong Kong Chinese, I can tell that the late 9th century's hygienic practice is I'm trying to find a word. It's just horrible. I want to find a worse word than horrible. I'm sorry, but I apologize for my lack of vocabulary about this matter. But just to give an idea, you have a house, you have a pig farm in the urban areas. By the way, pig farm up on there. It's like a double deck, but the lower deck is a pig farm. Up deck, 6 or 7 people live in bed. A bed for 6 or 7 people. Where's the sewage system? Nope. Hygienic practices? Nope. It was horrible. I mean, now we know that back then, the late 19th century, the hygiene standard is relatively low comparing to the current standard we're having. But we can all agree that what I have just described is absolutely not up to the late 19th century hygiene standard. It is simply practically have to stop it. And also, they forgot conveniently that there were exemptions we made. First of all, by the business tycoon Sir Robert Holton. Yes, I know that he's a Eurasian, a mixed, but he was always proud to be a Chinese because if you take a look at his profile, actually he was basically he's a product of if I remember, it is yes, a Dutch Jewish a person. He was coming to here and married his mother, who was Chinese, and then later, well, that Dutch Jewish man just abandoned them. So his mom take care of him and raised the whole family, I believe 4 to 5 kids, up, including himself. So he was always proud of his Chinese heritage, despite he has like a Eurasian face, shall we say in this way. He was always proud of Chinese heritage. So that's a thing. Not to mention about that, yes, the first lady of the of ROC, Chiang Kai-shek's wife. I forgot which wife, because Chiang Kai-shek been divorced a few times. I forgot which wife, the third or fourth. I forgot which one. But you can conduct your research of Song Mei Ling. Sorry, Mei Ling Song. She got an exemption. I mean, surely if it is against Chinese, why do they have exemption? It's very straightforward, the question. Because someone clearly does not want to know the facts. And by the way, just to have a clear idea, this Act 1 went to pass because most of the people that come a misunderstanding that there's no representation of the Chinese in the Legislative Council. There are some leaders of Chinese there was back then in the represent the Chinese community. They just like the basically community leaders. And actually, they didn't oppose that. If they considered that as offense, they would have opposed it and petitioned that right the way. So it's showing that someone clearly convenient forgot the history. Let's say what he's going to forget next.
Which the British wish to preserve as their exclusive enclaves. They forget how in a land in which 98% of the...
I forgot to make sure that this picture, just slightly rewind this picture. This is from the 1967 riots. We'll talk about that later because it will touch this point, okay, because I already previewed his video. And we're going to get back to 1967 riots, okay.
The British wish to preserve as their exclusive...
This is the Kowloon War City that I famously talk about in the first stream that we have with Scotty. If you have the issue, please refer to our first stream, okay? Or you can just drop a comment because I always enjoy the conversations between. I mean, you can see that I am engaged with you guys, and just feel free to comment. I mean, that is the whole thing. And thanks to you giving me some of the video suggestion. And by the way, you know what I'm going to say. Like and subscribe and ring the bell. You know the gist. Anyway, let's carry on.
enclaves. They forget how in a land in which 98% of the population was Chinese, English was the official language. The Chinese language was not permitted to be used in government offices. Laws regulating conduct were written exclusively in English, a language which the vast majority of the population could not understand. They forget the 1967.
Now, before they go to 1967, they're trying to go to that. First of all, the language is written. Yes, you're right. I'm saying you when saying that video was right because it's about it until the 1974 that basic Chinese has become English. But today, basically, yes, they have a second language, but all of them are English first. There's nothing wrong about it. The key question here is whether this become an obstacle for the communication channels to be clear through. Now, first of all, in terms of Chinese and Chinese communication, there's nothing. This is not a big deal. I mean, let's face it. If you are a Chinese trying to communicate Chinese, you do not have to be bothered. I mean, you have laws to be set, but the question is that when I say we, ethnic Chinese have other separate system. For example, like they can have a separate contract system. They can agree on all this kind of things. They find their own mediators to. Excuse me, pardon my bad stomach. They can do mediate themselves. So there are a parallel system. I mean, bear in mind that back then there is their own exclusive file service. I mean, they will run their own file service, and they've owned a small security guard and police group, like similar thing, to patrol them. So it is kind of like a very interesting approach. They try to ignore this what I call a parallel that exists. For example, like if you go to the court, I mean, Chinese between Chinese, they do not prefer to go to the British system, which is fine because well, either don't understand the language or difficult to find a lawyer, whatever that it is. They will go to the Manmu Temple, and to say that basically it is a temple that is in Hong Kong, not very far away from Hong Kong, by the way. They will be saying that is judged by the God, I didn't lie, and you have to settle this, and they will settle it. Now, seems someone you see the point. These people are talking about completely out of touch. They do not have a clue what about history is, and they don't even know what is going on. Now, you may say, look, how about deal with the Westerners? I mean, surely deal with the Westerners doesn't know English. Absolutely is a disadvantage, right? No. In fact, Hong Kong rule of law has been established very good at the very start of the beginning of the colonies of Hong Kong. A very good example of the Easing Bakery incident. What happened was that it's a bakery started by all Chinese entrepreneur who originally come from China, okay, mainland China. They come in and they say that, look, I want to run my business, and this is one of the he's one of the most successful entrepreneurs back then. He run a bakery business. I mean, most of the Westerners, that buy bread from him. One day in the late 1950s, they got poisoned. I mean, bear in mind that you got poisoning of Westerners, almost everyone. I mean, the situation was that even from the Chief Justice of the High Court had to get poisoned. He's a victim of it. But despite that, when the case was taken to the High Court, he was ruled not guilty. I mean, surely if you are having any problem or your hatred towards Chinese, you got to be convicted them, right? I mean, you see the problem. These people do not understand what is going on about history, and they're trying to frame all these kind of things. This is a very good precedent has been established, and I firmly believe in that this one do not know this thing exists. So, I just want to show all of you guys that this was never an issue. There are different systems, there are different mechanisms, but the question is that they were running together instead of crashing out. It actually working decent. Okay, so the fact that what he's saying is just simply bullshit, really. Okay, let's take a look what he's going to say next about 1967.
7 protests in Hong Kong where the British massacred dozens of people and imprisoned thousands. Hi.
Now, 1967, oh dear. Do not get this started from me. Now, yes, they do kill people. I'm not trying to say that the real opponents kill people. I mean, I think it would be irresponsible to say this is not the case. But what I'm trying to say, one, the 1967 riots was mostly triggered by the. I know this is going to be bloody insane. You have in the trade unions and before handover, you have 2 different groups of trade unions. One is pro PRC. It's pro Mao, okay. One is pro ROC, pro Taiwan, pro Jiang. So this is quite funny. You got one factory, you have two separate group workers. Okay, I know this kind of like insane, but that is the thing. Just giving people context. It's mainly triggered by the 1967 riot. It's mainly triggered by the triggered by the left-wing rioters because they have a dispute, and with an other not the left wing. Put it in this way. This is a more better approach. The PRC pro-PRC unions, they have a dispute with the pro-ROC unions, and basically reach to a fight. After that, the pro-PRC unions, both of them, has been dismissed. This triggered the whole thing. Now, however, this guy on this video of this producer, conveniently dodged the one thing that we haven't talked about. Based on all the evidence that we've seen so far, there are some people in the Guangdong or Canton province, that is the Hong Kong, the province next to Hong Kong, they deliberately trying to orchestrate a cultural revolution style takeover, because before that in Macau, it already have a similar thing happened, and they're trying to do the same thing in Hong Kong. And now, we do not know whether Zhou Enlai has intervened itself. There are conflicting accounts that some suggest that he doesn't want to do it. Some suggest that he actually issued conflicting orders that confusing each other. Do not even know what exactly is going on. But the issue is that at the end, Zhou Enlai secured the Mao's approval to stop the whole thing going on, because they basically say that Hong Kong is a very useful place, and if we take over, it will just simply shut the whole PRC door down. So we get to keep this and basically stop this process to going on. So that is the thing. And also, I want to remind this guy that one, the riot was absolutely disaster for Hong Kong situation. Now, a very good reminder that actually IED, improvised explosive device, was detonated multiple times in Hong Kong and killing not only frontline police men and women, not women yet, probably, policemen. I'm not 100% sure, don't count me on the woman world, okay? But at the same time, the ordinary civilians with two young, not toddlers, kids, who just are on the street, in the street, doesn't know that they're IEDs and take it out, and boom, they are both killed. Oh, by the way, don't forget this gentleman. Who is this guy? Lam was his surname. He was a broadcaster, a radio broadcaster, a DJ these days, what we call. He was a severe critic of all these riots and all these kind of IEDs. And then what happened? And he has received death threats. And well, one of his colleagues actually accompanied him to go to the police and to report them. However, Mr. Lam has said that he does not need to have the police support or protection. Unfortunately, one day when he was driving, he and his cousin was subject to an arson attack, and they both died. Simply because he dared to criticize the pro-PRC cultural revolutions, attempted cultural revolution. Sorry, just like tongue twist. Attempted cultural revolution type of takeover in Hong Kong. I bet that this video producer never know this man. And the managing director of his radio station, commercial radio, George Ho Chi Ho, will vouch to make sure that as long as he is the boss of the radio station, his relatives will always get paid. It's Mr. Lam's relatives will always get paid, because they will not back down on the freedom of speech. How many people know this story in the West? Not many. Still, this is right the reason that the commercial radio was rightly respected until like recent years, because it started being compromised, especially after Mr. Ho's death. And about the respect because of their willing to stand firm of freedom of speech during the critical time of Hong Kong. Anyway, let's take a look what he's going to say next.
Another untrue thing that's being thrown around is that China is censoring news about Hong Kong, which is such nonsense it's unbelievable. Just take a look at Reddit, where pro-Hong Kong posts get hundreds of thousands of upvotes on practically every subreddit. If there really was censorship, you wouldn't be seeing any of that.
Now, we have to understand what is about censorship and propagandering. They could be manipulated to the direction that is they wish to. As we have discussed it previously on the second stream, there are a lot of what we call 5p gang, 5 pence gangs. I mean, you are pardon me, I'm a British, not cent. Although some of you use cents, but anyway, the whole thing that is here is about the manipulation towards the agenda they wish to achieve. Because you have two different factions of CCP trying to twist each other out. So the fact that they ignore this, and plus the one faction of CCP actually is partner or collude, whatever you want to call them, with the West to try to do it, and that is the way that it is. So that's why how to manipulate and censoring. It depends on how you define censoring. Try to see how many of them will mention about the things I've said. How many of them get voted up? It's a question that I will leave all of you guys to think about that. Let's see what you're going to say next.
I get it. A lot of people are just karma farming because they love meaningless internet points, but I'm sure an equal percentage actually believes that A, China is really censoring Reddit, it isn't, and B, that they're doing something that can impact the protests in any way. They aren't.
Now, censoring and impacting, it depends on how to say impacting. You're going to bring the message forward, you're going to push it to your MPs or representatives. Now, that is the thing. The censoring I'm already talking about, so I'm not going to repeat myself. But let's see what he's going to say next.
The worst thing, I think, is the rampant racism that has come out of protesters and people in the West. I hope you're aware of how disgustingly racist some people in Hong Kong are towards mainlanders. Just speaking Mandarin will get you worse service, numerous racist remarks, and, within the current protest climate, beat up or worse. When the basketball player LeBron James made some very fair comments about the issue, some Hong Kong protesters started chanting the N-word in relation to him, calling him monkey, etc., etc., just generally very unpleasant and reactionary things. The worst of it is the sheer amount of xenophobia coming out of many people in the West. Take a look at any comment section under a pro-Hong Kong post and you'll see what I mean. Now, speaking solely to the leftists watching.
Now, the rest of the things that I believe is not going to be the main debunking point, so I would finish it here. Now, this is the point I always pointed out. They only see the end, but they didn't know how it begins. Now, what we're going to talk about is very interesting because let's talk about it this way. Why does such things happen? Because after 2004, when the so-called individual traveling scheme come down to Hong Kong, now origin is not a problem. I mean, you have mainland Chinese come in to spend the money. Okay, fine, we could serve them. I mean, it was never a problem. I mean, just like in the 1950s when people flooding to from the PRs and flooding in, it was not a problem. Of course, it does have some problem. For example, you are from where, and you have the natural inklings, because psychological distance closer together, and that is the thing. Okay, there is some, but you're not going to have a so-called xenophobic that we're describing. What happened is that start in 2009 and 10, when the so-called PRC is now rising as a great super power. These mainland Chinese become very arrogant. Now, I'm not saying that all of them are. I must stress that. The trouble is, when they come to Hong Kong, what they did, they said that if not because we come to Hong Kong, you're already dead. Economically dead. I correct myself, Ricky? It's economic dead. If not because we come in to support you, you're all shite. I mean, excuse me. This is a mutual benefit relationship. Plus, they are basically coming out to doing all the things that to detest people, to basically say, look, we are now the new rich. You are just a bunch of people that you have to serve us. For example, like we were using traditional Chinese, they say that, why you don't give me a simplified Chinese? I mean, excuse me. This is a place that you go to. If we serve you simplified Chinese, we, as a sense of like engaging with our customers. But we do have our right to not serving this. Just like you will not go to a French restaurant. I mean, French go to Paris to demanding someone that why you cannot speak someone who can speak Mandarin to serve us. I big means that I correct myself. There is some case happening in the Paris restaurant to say that, but plenty of them decline. The whole thing that they don't talk about is this kind of issue. Of course, the N word. I have friends who talk about that in the before, so I'm not going to get the duckets over here. But I will just remind the people that action and reaction pair. If you do not understand history in the past, you will never understand how this happened. And that is the thing. Now, this is the overall general review of what is going on. Once again, I would like to thank Naruto. I hope I didn't butcher your name. I do apologize in advance if I did. And of course, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please give us a like and share it. And of course, subscribe and ring the bell. I know you probably hate me to say that, but please do. I mean, this is good for our logarithm, good at spreading messages, and that is the thing. Now, I understand, I appreciate that we are having a lot of audience who trying for us getting more video up. But Scotty and I both enjoy our Christmas and New Year break. So we're going to recharge our batteries. And in the future, we have much more topics to come back. And we have plans to have stream as well. So please be patient. But before then, just stay safe and take care. Enjoy. I hope you enjoyed. And bye-bye.